Futurized goes beneath the trends, tracking the underlying forces of disruption in tech, policy, business models, social dynamics, and the environment. Join me, futurist Trond Arne Undheim, PhD author, investor, and serial entrepreneur, as I discuss the societal impact of deep tech such as AI, blockchain, IoT, nanotech, quantum, robotics, and synthetic biology, and tackle topics such as entrepreneurship, trends, or the future of work. I'm a research scholar in global systemic risk, innovation, and policy at Stanford University. On Futurized, I interview smart people with a soul, founders, authors, executives, and other thought leaders, or even the occasional celebrity. Futurized is a bi-weekly show preparing you to think about how to deal with the next decade's disruption so you can succeed and thrive no matter what happens. Futurized, conversations that matter. If you're new to the show, seek particular topics, or are looking for a great way to tell your friends about the show, we've got the episode categories. Those are at futurized.org/episodes. I am the co-author of Augmented Lean, a human-centric framework for managing frontline operation, and the author of Health Tech, Rebooting Society's Software, Hardware, and Mindset, Future Tech, How to Capture Value from Disruptive Industry Trends, Pandemic Aftermath, How Coronavirus Changes Global Society, The Disruption Games, How to Thrive on Serial Failure, and of Leadership from Below, How the Internet Generation Redefines the Workplace. For an overview, you can go to trondundheim.com/books. At this stage, Futurized is lucky enough to have several sponsors, and to check them out, go to futurized.org/sponsors. If you're interested in sponsoring the podcast or to get an overview of other services provided by me, including how to book me for keynote speeches, please go to futurized.org/store. We'll consider all brands that have demonstrably positive contributions to the future. Before you do anything else, make sure you are subscribed to our newsletter on futurized.org, where you can find hundreds of episodes of conversations that matter to the future. Please also leave a positive review on iTunes. Thanks so much.
Ken, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. Really glad to be here.
Ken, I've looked into you. You're a very accomplished person. You've been a professor of computer science. You've been involved in some of the most enticing and path-breaking AI startups and companies. And now, you've done notable academic work on open algorithms. And now you are a founder of a new social network. That was not the obvious path, perhaps, but you say it's important. I want you to tell us a little bit about your path to getting here. You've written academic publications. You, I think, are a co-author of some popular science work as well, and have founded or co-founded or certainly been a leading engineer in several startups. So you straddle the academic world of computer science with the startup world. Tell me how you got there, and then we can get to serendipity and what's wrong with current social media after that.
Yeah. So it is a little bit of a strange story that, I starting out by researching artificial intelligence, and now I'm doing social media. But hopefully it's an interesting story. I was originally just very interested in AI ever since I was a little kid. And I was particularly interested, though, in this one particular subfield in AI called open-endedness, or at least it's called open-endedness today. And it's not necessarily the most well-known field, but it is a thriving little community within AI. For example, I was leading the open-endedness team at OpenAI, and there is an open-endedness team at DeepMind too. And so there's definitely actual research going on in open-endedness. And the field of open-endedness was particularly appealing to me because it's about systems that are boundlessly creative. And I've always been really interested in creativity from an AI perspective. Like, how can you make systems that are actually creative? And open-ended systems, this term open-endedness refers to the ultimate kind of creativity. It's like systems that just keep on pumping out really interesting stuff for as long as they run. And actually, ideally, they would get more interesting the longer they run. And so if that sounds a bit abstract, there are actually some concrete examples of this in the real world. And they're really the inspiration for why I'm interested in this. And the two big examples include, first, evolution or biological evolution. You can see that that's a very creative process, and it's open-ended in the sense that you start with a single cell, and you keep it running, and it could go for more than 1 billion years. And the longer it runs, the more species are invented. And these are non-trivial inventions. I mean, this is all of living nature in a single run. Which the way an AI researcher would think of is like a single run of an algorithm. And it invented flight, it invented photosynthesis, it invented intelligence itself, which is the inspiration for AI. And it just keeps going. And the longer it goes, the more interesting it gets. So this is like an incredible virtuosic form of creativity, which is just like an aspect of the universe.
Do
And
you have
there's
an
one of,
example of another one that's not created by nature, that's more human created, or
yeah,
what is your other?
yeah, yeah, for sure. Yeah, that's the other important one is civilization. That's the human created one. And so civilization is important. I just want to point out it has the same property in that you start with simple things like wheels and fire, for example, inventions, and it just diverges and branches out forever to more and more complex and interesting things. Like now we have things like space stations and computers thousands of years later in this open-ended process. And importantly, it's not converging to a point. It's not like there's a final invention, which is the end of civilization. It keeps diverging and diverging and actually getting more interesting the longer it goes. And kind of the important thing about civilization from an open-ended perspective is, as you pointed out, it's a product of human intelligence. Like there is no civilization without intelligence. So, in some sense, civilization is the greatest expression of our intelligence, at least in my opinion.
Mhm.
Like you can solve some problems. Like I could give you a test and maybe you could impress me and get some right answers. But the thing that you remember about people or humanity in general is the things that were creative. And those are the things that surround you, like everything that you see, and like the microphone in front of your head and the walls around you and the chair and how it's designed. It's like all just creative products built on endless chains of stepping stones going back to the beginning of history, every single one of them. And it just keeps on diverging, getting more interesting. And the reason both of these are really important, evolution and civilization, is that think about the fact that we're in the middle. There's like an open-endedness sandwich with us in the middle. It's like evolution produced human intelligence, and then we produced civilization. So it's like it explains who we are, and then it explains what we do. And so I've always thought like we're never going to get to, say, AGI without really understanding open-endedness and how to actually make it happen on a computer through an algorithm.
Yeah, and we'll get to that in a second. I just want to point out that I think a lot of people over the last few decades, people were sort of always saying, oh, yeah, interesting with AI, but at least we humans can focus on creativity. You are kind of turning that on its head, saying it's actually possibly creativity that is one of AI's strongest suits potentially in the long run. How does that all compute? And pardon my pun, but that's a little strange. And I would say the support for your hypothesis got a little stronger recently with OpenAI's new releases, and even ChatGPT 3, GPT-3 was kind of surprising because some of the creatives in the industry, like the digital media people, first were a little scared, and then they realized, wait a second, this actually, I can amplify myself using this, and it's actually somewhat creative, or at least it is
Mhm.
augmenting my own creativity and scaling my creativity. Um, One, do these people have reason to be fearful? And two, how long until that current paradigm truly starts to challenge the most creative creatives?
Yeah, I mean, I think I agree that in some sense, creativity is one of the last unconquered frontiers for AI. It's like
Mm.
AI just keeps knocking down challenges and going over new hurdles. Like it learns how to do things that we didn't realize it would be able to do. We're very impressed. It can even hold conversations. But creativity is a special thing about being human, which has historically been very difficult for AI. And so it's not so much a question of is AI creative or is it not creative? At least for me as a researcher, it's more the question is should it be creative? I mean, if you want AI to be able to capture what humans can do in its full grandiosity, then it must also include the fact that we're creative, because that in some sense is like the most impressive thing about us is our creativity. And so like to me it's a research challenge to think about how it could do that. But I would agree, or at least I would personally hold the opinion that it doesn't do it as well as us, even today, historically far from us. But it's gotten better, as you point out, like things like large models that are getting a lot of attention today. But I still would assert that that's not close to our version of creativity, like in the sense that like the most important creative products are the ones that push civilization forward. And there's not a lot of examples where on its own completely there's an artifact you can point to which you can say really moved the needle on civilization itself yet. And so I don't think we're quite there yet with AI. But if we were to get to something that's at a human level, then we would have to get there. But the implications are profound if we did. I mean, if AI truly could do creativity at the level we can do, there are enormous social implications to that. And so I'm not necessarily saying that we should or shouldn't do that. I think it's something we should think about, because obviously everything will change if human creativity is not any longer necessary to go forward in civilization. But it's just from a purely kind of theoretical perspective. Of course, you don't really understand intelligence unless you also understand creativity. So theoretically, it needs to be captured to fully understand it.
Can I ask you about what you just said? Everything will change if uh, superior than human, or at least equal to human creativity, can be achieved by machines, at which point everything would change. Why would you say everything would change? Because Bostrom and others are saying, well, it's a problem because machines will then decides to make paper clips or some silly thing. You're saying it will change. Why exactly? Not
Well,
necessarily because it
you
will be
know,
malicious, but because what? It challenges our
yeah.
sort of challenge in the top of the food chain situation, or what?
Well, it's kind of like the last piece of humanity that stays standing, where we still have something useful to contribute. Once all of the sort of mundane and analytic and mechanical tasks are conquered, like the last thing standing is creativity. So it's like, and it's like along that road, really interesting and useful things become possible. So, like you said, like it could help you to realize a creative product that you couldn't do yourself. Like for example, you could come up with like an idea for a picture, and thanks to DALL-E, like now we can get that picture generated, but you may not be an artist. So in this case though, the creative spark still came from you. Like you had the idea of the picture. It's just that the realization of it was facilitated through AI. If someday you don't even need a human for the creative spark, that's when I'm saying things really change, because then ideas themselves and their realization all can come through AI, and they're superior or at least as good as our own. And so,
But
like,
Ken,
I,
arguably some of that's happening already, because you can have average people's creativity sparked by machine comments already. Like if I go into my class, even at Stanford, and I prompt them with a question, whether that question came from a machine or came from me, I
Mhm.
would say there's a zero chance that they would really be able to spot that live, whether that was coming from a machine or I just voiced that, um,
Mhm.
or a machine. Like that's very hard to distinguish even today, right?
Yeah, I mean, I would say,
Or maybe you would
creativity is a
distinguish it because
spectrum.
it would technically come from some other humans who had at some point sparked that into a machine algorithm. Is that what you mean? Because it's
Well,
getting a
no,
little
no,
indirect here, but or are you talking
yeah,
about
yeah, yeah.
direct spark to reaction?
No, yeah. So I mean, yeah, there is some ambiguity here because it's a complex topic. But I think of creativity as a spectrum. So like clearly, there's some level of creativity already in AI. Like for example, I could say, GPT, please write a story about a princess who lives on Mars, and it'll come up with a story. I mean, you might call that creative, like its own. I mean, the idea for the story was mine. So if that's creative, then it's my creativity. But the story itself was written by it. So it gets credit for that, and we can call it creative. But I'm not necessarily referring to that kind of creativity. I'm referring to a prodigious level above that, which is things that actually move the needle in some area that contributes to civilization moving forward. It's like when a new genre is created, when an invention that changes all our lives is created. It's not just here's just like a run of the mill story about a princess on Mars. But give me an idea for a story that like totally changes my thinking, and that's
Hmm.
actually quite hard. But it
It's
happens
hard,
all the time throughout history.
right?
And it's not where AI is positioned right now is to come up with those ideas. Those ideas are still exclusively the domain of humans.
No, I think that's super interesting, but I'm just pointing out that it's an interesting thing that as humans, we really grasp and try to hold on to this notion that we are the only creative things around. And maybe we are. But of course, since intelligence and creativity varies on a bell curve, there are times when I think I'm creative, and honestly, it's probably just regurgitating something that my neighbor said, or I heard
Yeah, yeah.
in the corridors.
Yeah.
It happens.
I mean, it's very subjective. So yeah, I mean, we could always argue about any specific example. Is it truly creative? How creative is it?
Yeah.
You may think something is mediocre. Someone else may think it's the most interesting thing they've ever heard.
Mm.
But I think that over ultimately, history does reveal fundamental insights, fundamental new ideas, new genres, and they stand the test of time. It's not that I'm saying it's ultimately objective. Like I don't have a problem like admitting that it's subjective, but my point is like the most cutting edge, the most brilliant, the most moving, the most authentic, great ideas. They're not coming from GPT right now. But there's lots of examples of those in history. Like there's a huge, like that's basically what we remember of humanity are all of those things. Like when there's a new genre of art, like surrealism, when there's a new genre of music, like rock and roll, like those types of events are events that humans precipitate. And I'm arguing, I'm not proving, I'm just arguing that that's still the case today in 2024. I'm not saying it'll never change, but I don't think you're going to get something equivalent to the invention of rock and roll anytime soon, purely from just the model. Maybe a human with the model collaborating, that might happen, but the
Well,
model
there,
on its
that's
own
you
doesn't do
just
that.
took my question out of my mouth there, because I find it kind of funny that you're the AI scientist arguing for creativity, and I'm the non-AI scientist arguing that machines are advanced. But I just wanted to point out that even rock and roll, of course, relied on a confluence of technologies that were made available. The synthesizer was later, but think about like the electric guitar,
Hmm.
amplification, and the studio model, and that's what created the Beatles,
Yeah.
arguably more so than Paul McCartney himself. There was a confluence of different factors, and
Mhm.
the band was using an assembly of technology. So I think human creativity at its highest level is in some ways always dependent on the material basis for which they rely on, and kind of combine
Mhm.
in other ways. But let's move to what you think of as serendipity and serendipity networks for a while. So we're going to get to social media for soon, but serendipity, then, is that for you part of this higher level creativity, or is it kind of more of a group phenomenon within human discourse? And why are you so fascinated with this notion and this phenomenon?
Yeah. So the reason serendipity comes up is because it's related to this notion of open-endedness or open-ended systems.
Hmm.
And the key kind of intriguing aspect of open-ended systems is that they don't have a defined destination or goal. Like you don't start an open-ended system knowing where it's going to end up from the beginning. This is an intrinsic aspect of a creativity. It's like you don't know where you're going while you're being creative, but somehow you get there. And so, like something like evolution, like you can't predict at day one what it's going to produce, and it's not an explicit goal. Like it's not like humans are the goal specified at the beginning. This is interesting because most machine learning algorithms do have a goal specified at the beginning. And so civilization also doesn't have a goal that's been pre-specified. It's not like there's this goal that we all going to build a time machine and everything is in service of that goal. It actually explicitly doesn't have a goal. And so what is happening in the systems in aggregate, I'm not talking about specific examples, but in aggregate across the entire system, is that you're constantly having unpredicted transformative experiences. Things that were not planned in advance are happening despite the fact that they weren't planned in the aggregate system. It's not like humans were planned. It's not like space stations were planned from day one. There wasn't a plan to how to get to that point. In fact, just like you said, like there's all these stepping stones. Like with rock and roll, you've got the guitars, you got the amplifiers, you get like this whole set of inventions that really were invented without even thinking about rock and roll. None of those were invented because somebody was thinking about rock and roll. They were invented not thinking about the thing that ultimately was invented because of them. And that's what we call serendipity. It's basically unplanned greatness. So when something happens that you weren't expecting to happen, but changes your life or changes the world. And the thing is, open-ended systems are basically serendipity generators. everything they do is serendipitous because none of it was planned. And this is important from an algorithmic perspective, because we want to understand, how do you program systems that don't know where they're going, but still produce interesting outputs? Because that's what open-ended systems do. And this kind of issue of serendipity generating systems is really what led to why we wrote the book that you mentioned. It's called Why Greatness Cannot Be Planned. And as you could see, I said, when you have unplanned greatness, that's serendipity.
So unplanned greatness, that's what you're going for. And then that must have been pretty disappointing then to you, the evolution of social media. So not to blame certain people sitting at Harvard and wanting to get to know more people, but the basic application that defines social media today was based on, I guess, some notion that there is loneliness out there, and if you could find a better optimization between people you want to meet and find a very simple way to connect with them, perhaps through a picture, that would change the world. And that notion has kind of morphed into the dating world now, and is part of social media on the dating scene. It's still part of the general subject of other mainstream social media as well, but it's based on something you react to, because it's based on following people and not following subjects. You seem to want to go back to, I guess, the beginning of the web. When I remember, these interest groups on the web, you were following threads then. What is so powerful about that notion, and what is it that you're trying to achieve here?
Well, I want to point out that it was actually the thing that led me to doing that, which is pretty accurate the way you described it. Like, you're going to follow interest instead of following influencers, is kind of how we put it. But the thing that led to that, it actually wasn't me observing social media. It wasn't me being critical of social media. It was actually this discovery that we made in the field of open-endedness, which led to me actually seeing an application of that discovery to social media. And the discovery was this really, really weird principle. I call it the objective paradox, which is that in some cases, you can only find what you want by not looking for it. This is a real counterintuitive point. And you have to understand that when I say this, like if I tell you can only find things by not looking for them, it's not a philosophical idea. It's not like I have this new age philosophy. This was an empirical result from experiments we saw in AI. So I wasn't trying to make a philosophical point, but I observed this algorithmically, that in many cases, the algorithms would be more successful at finding solutions to interesting or open problems if they were not directed to try to solve the problem. And this insight was, to me, mind-blowing, because I had been taught, like many people who have like engineering or computer science backgrounds, that like the way to accomplish things is by setting objectives and then moving towards them, which I'd always sort of believed without really thinking about it much, just implicitly believed for my whole life, because it just seems to make intuitive sense. Like, you set goals, and there's all these names for that. Like, there's top-down design, there's bottom-up design, there's optimization, there's gradient descent, like following the gradient. Like, all these different things are all about set objectives, move towards those objectives in some systematic way that's principled. And so what I was observing, though, in these experiments was the stark opposite phenomenon, which is that like setting the objective itself was the worst thing you could do. And then you look at these open-ended systems like evolution or civilization, and it's hard not to notice that like they don't have an explicit objective. And so it sort of explains why they work so well. Like, if humans were the actual objective of evolution, there would be no humans. This is a paradox. That's why I call it the objective paradox. If a space station was the entire objective of all of civilization, there would be no space station. The reason is because the stepping stones that you need to get to these things don't resemble these things. Like, to get to humans, you need to go through flatworms. So flatworms don't have a high intelligence. They don't have necessarily higher intelligence than anything else. So we wouldn't reward those flatworms if all we cared about was getting to humans. And to get computers, you need to go through vacuum tubes. But the people working on vacuum tubes were not thinking about computers. If you told them to build computers, we would have no vacuum tubes and no computers, because you need the vacuum tubes to get to the computers. So sometimes you have to not be thinking about the ultimate destination. And this really, that like was something that simmered inside me for years. We wrote a whole book about it. That's what the book is actually about. And I spoke to people about this insight, like not just in the computer science AI world, but across society. Like I met all kinds of walks of life after writing this book, who were all disgruntled about the fact that we live in this suffocating objective driven world. And this is where it starts to apply to social media, because social media is just like all these other institutions. It also buys into the assumption that the only way to get to the promised land is to know where you're going. And this principle, this objective paradox, shows this actually not true. And so, if you think about our culture, like our institutions, like educational institutions, science funding institutions, corporations, philanthropy, government, like it's all objectively driven. And I learned, like, because of the book I wrote talking to people about this issue, that everybody is just completely fed up with it because there's no room for serendipitous exploration. In other words, I can't just apply for science funding by saying, hey, I have something here that's really interesting. I actually don't have a deliverable. I'm not sure what it's going to do, but it deserves to be investigated because it's interesting. Like they don't want that. They want to know what you're going to deliver. What's the hypothesis? What's the objective? What's the outcome? The deliverable, like all of that stuff pervades everything we do. I mean, even dating, like you mentioned, I mean, dating also works through objective means. Like you're supposed to know what you're looking for. The assumption of objectives is right up front. Like how would you know what's going to bring you for lifelong happiness? But we assume that you should know because you have an objective. And so it's just so pervasive. And I learned that people are so sick of it that what occurred to me was, what if I could create an open-ended network that works the way I've understood and learned over my career from studying open-ended algorithms, open-endedness should work, which is non-objectively. And I thought I had this word serendipity network in my head, like when I was thinking about this. I wasn't even thinking about other social networks, but then it immediately occurred to me that this was a really interesting contrarian counterpoint to what other social networks are, which is extremely objective. And the objective is, in my opinion, popularity. Popularity, it has become this proxy for what we hope is quality, but it's just like all ambitious objectives, highly deceptive in the sense that the things that lead to great quality in some global, like grandiose sense are not necessarily themselves of what everybody would have a consensus is great quality. And so we live in this deceptive paradox in social media where we are being exposed to an extremely narrow, deceptive set of outcomes, which explains why are we seeing all of these unintended consequences? Like, why is there toxicity and echo chambers and narcissism amplification and branding gone out of control? Like, all of that stuff is what you would expect from the objective paradox, because it's a deceptive gradient, because it's too complex of a space, like all of interestingness, to just boil down to a single objective parameter, which is popularity. And so we're getting what we asked for, which is lots of deceptive, unintended consequences. And so I realized that like a serendipity network could be an antidote to all of this stuff that's going on. So that's the story. It's a pretty
that's
story.
a great story. I want to get to what you think you can achieve with this. I mean, let's go to Hey Maven and Maven in a second, but more generally, are you saying that if you optimize for something a bit more complex, you'll get both better science and better society? Because I guess my question goes to this. You're saying we have indeed built the space station, but had we organized ourselves more optimally towards interests and not popularity contests, we would have built 10x the space station already. We would have been, to Mars already if that's what we discovered. If that could have happened literally, because so this doesn't just have implications for having a fun place to interact and find it more interesting. You're basically saying that civilization will benefit from this kind of logic.
Yeah. That is sort of implicit in what I'm saying. Like I don't want to, like explicitly say that like we'd be already on Mars or something specific like that. But
I
yeah, the
understand.
general gist of what you're saying is compatible with my argument. It's that things could be going better. It's like obviously some things have gone well, like getting into space. That's very impressive. But usually like the explanation for those things is non-objective. But it happened despite ourselves, not because of ourselves. Like my point about vacuum tubes, like it's a good thing that all those really smart people in the 1800s who were working on vacuum tubes were not interested in computers, because it allowed them to spend time just working on the vacuum tubes that would eventually be used in the computers. And so it's not like we planned it out that way, or somebody said, don't think too much about computers, like don't have an objective. It's just that it just so happened that there were these divergent streams. And so we're lucky for that. But now today, like the way that we run things, because it's become more and more rigidly objective, because you see, we've learned from an organizational perspective how to control things and sort of create a safety blanket around everything. Like we're very concerned about risk. Like this is maybe less true historically, and we think we've become experts at mitigating risk through assessment. We love assessment. But you see, the word assessment is directly related to the word of objective, because the way that we decide whether we're moving towards an objective is by assessing what we're doing. And so assessment is constantly used to decide whether we should cancel the project and save the money and prevent ourselves from the horrible possibility that something might happen that we didn't want to happen. And this is making progress actually slower along all of these different institutional dimensions that I'm talking about. It's not that nothing ever happens. Obviously, there's still progress happening, but it's just that a lot of things could work better. And individuals also are becoming trapped in this kind of straitjacket, which is really unfortunate. It's not just a society-wide problem. It's a problem for individuals, which is especially apparent in social media, that like your opportunity for serendipity is limited because all the stepping stones that could change your life have been drowned out by the objective metrics that pervade through everything.
So I have a bunch of questions, and I want to eventually get to things like skills and how, what you think the implications are for what we should be doing in educational institutions and other places. But let's go to your application at the moment, because I have a number of questions about how this is going to work. Because both you and I know that from a concept to a product, there's a far, long road. And especially because of your own argument that you can't plan this thing too well, I'm kind of curious, how did you go about
Yeah.
productizing Maven?
Yeah, that's
Because if you go too closely
yeah,
into
no,
the
that's a
industrial
great point.
mindset, you're in trouble.
Yeah. I mean, that's actually like the general question comes up a lot with me of like, how do I actually function at all? Because like if my
Right.
philosophy, I can't ever like decide to do anything. I
Designed
understand.
as a suboptimal being, yeah.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah. So
Yeah.
I try to be by the way, I should just note that like I'm not against all objectives. Like I've often said, like, and based on the research that we've done, that like modest objectives do work because we do know the stepping stones. So like if you understand how you can get from A to B because you understand the
Yeah.
intervening stepping stones, of
Please
course you
conduct that step.
can do
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
This is all about like, really ambitious, creative things that involve discovery and exploration. That's the kind of stuff I'm talking about.
Yeah.
But it's still relevant, to like, how would I go down this road and create a product that people actually use and so forth? Because, clearly I can't just play around for 15 years and nobody wants to use it. I mean, at some point there are some things that have to be achieved. But the way I look at it is that, my initial insight, which is that it's possible to put an open-ended algorithm around people. It's possible to have a serendipity network, which means really like more concretely, it means that it's possible to surface stepping stones to people that are specifically idiosyncratically relevant to you, as opposed to what the consensus of some huge number of people think is important, is possible. That's the hypothesis. To me, that was opening up a playground. It wasn't so much like this is a product and like here's the objective, here's all of the desiderata, like it's just, we're going to do this. Like at the beginning, it was like there's a huge playground of possibilities just by having that thought. What would the world look like if it worked that way? It's not that I've concretely explained every specific aspect of the system, but it's like if you could create systems that work that way, that were not driven by consensus, because likes and follows is a massive consensus-driven system, but instead are driven by idiosyncratic interest matching. What kind of systems could exist in the world? So I saw what I was doing as sort of opening up a new playground, not creating a specific thing. I often think of like non-objective searches as opening up playgrounds. You have to identify something where huge numbers of new possibilities that have never been explored suddenly open up. And I was confident that some of those, if I was just allowed to explore, some of those will be appealing and actually usable by people. And I just needed permission to explore it. And that's what the company is, or at least was at the beginning, was basically it was the new playground and the prospect of exploring it. And our investors understood that. They understood that I'm a weird guy, that I don't have I don't like objectives. So you have to get a special kind of investor who's
Well,
willing to kind of
well, let me share
exploration.
something with you. So one of my frustrations, not with social media, but with search, I've always been frustrated by all of these search engines that have the darn arrogance, I would say, to serve me up with an empty search window. And here's why, and I want to hear your comment on that. Because I feel like it's a little bit like ATMs or online banking. It's like it sounds like a great idea for me because you're going to make it more convenient, but actually you're just making me do the work. In the sense that, why would I start over every morning and, in your favorite search engine, I would have to come up with the whole phrase, I would have to come up with the whole thing and adjust it, and then as if I know nothing and the system knows nothing about me. So I
Mhm.
guess that is one of the angles that I want to come at your network with. I want to say, well, show me something that I didn't know that I can build on. And if that is a taxonomy of concepts of interest, then that intrigues me. But even if that's true, here's my challenge to you, Ken, and this is frustrating for me in my academic world as well.
Mhm.
We are often asked to use keywords in our work, right? And then every journal has their own nomenclature. And
Sorry,
if
there was
you
a skip. There was an audio skip. I missed the question. Sorry.
I said every journal, asks you to come up with keywords. And when you search for things, you use these keywords that are concepts. But even in the academic world, that's not a very organized place. Are you saying that you want to create organized taxonomies? I mean, I realize you're in the early stages. So my guess is these concepts are still forming. But is your ultimate goal here to create these complex layers of categories, or because you could imagine that people start inventing so many concepts here in your interest network that it becomes hard to navigate.
Hmm.
And the search engines try to tell us that the Yahoo approach was wrong because they started indexing things and it wasn't scalable. So it
Hmm.
seems to
Hmm.
me that one of the critiques against what you're doing is, oh, well, you're doing the impossible
Hmm.
because you're
Hmm.
going back to concepts which we have abandoned because search you know is superior.
Yeah, yeah, understood. Oh, and by the way, you can take a look. So there is a concrete system that's been built now. So you can actually go in there and play with it. There is a way it works. And so, but the question is still, you know, really interesting, whether there's something impossible about this. I think so. What the system does, what it actually does as a practical matter, is that when people post things, it tries to extract the interests, to figure out what interest does this intersect with, and that's
Mhm,
done through AI. And that uses language model AI, and
mhm.
so it's not human tagging. So, in some sense, it's AI is tagging things, and so it's doing that because it's trying to figure out who might be interested in seeing this piece of content, and so it's trying to figure out not just one silo, because like you go to something like Reddit and you can go to a subreddit on a certain topic. It's like a silo on that one topic where people have committed themselves to reading things about that topic. But instead, this thing will extract, several different interests, because a lot of things people talk about are about more than one thing at the same time. Like you can be talking about AI and ethics at the same time. So
Mhm.
it'll figure out all of the cross-cutting interests, and it'll try to intersect people, and in that way cross-pollinate communities around those intersections. So if it figures out that what you just talked about is about AI and about ethics, then people interested in AI will be intersected with people who are interested in ethics along that conversation. And so,
So Ken, if that even if that's possible, though, I guess I'm just sort of playing your music forward here and looking at what your app might do in 5 years, because there's a certain other app which kind of won out in the area of workplace interests, and that particular app has been very successful. It's where people post their online CVs and then everybody posts articles they hope people read. But because of that particular network's business models, even if you write something that has all these attractive attributes of having a rich set of topics, because of the business model, they will disfavor you unless you fit certain criteria that match their business model. How are you going to be avoiding that, or are you not trying to avoid that? Because surely at some
Oh,
stage you're going to monetize this. So I'm just curious, have you also thought about a monetization model that doesn't destroy the idea that you started with?
yeah. Yeah. So, just on the basis of the mechanisms and incentives in the system, we're just radically different from all those networks because we don't have popularity. So, that's just one thing to note is that there's no likes and there's no follows in the system. You can follow an
Hmm.
interest, but you can't follow a person. And
Hmm.
so, like even like a big successful network like LinkedIn, you follow people, you upvote to the interesting things people are talking about. Like that's been completely thrown out the window because it's not just because I'm like contrarian and don't like social networks. It's been thrown out the window because of the fact that I understand that there are many things in the world that cannot be discovered through objective means, and that's a very
Hmm.
objective way of deciding like what is the mass consensus focused on. And so we've
Hmm.
thrown that out. And so the consequence of that is your experience is just completely different. Like you would not post an article that you're hoping people read. Like that's a popularity based action. And I'm not against doing that. Like you can go to the other social networks. That's what they're for. They're places you try to get attention. The only reason you say something on Maven is if you want to have a conversation about it with people who share your interests. Like that's what's different
Hmm.
about it. Like the fact that that's radical is what's wrong. Like that shouldn't be radical, that you just want to talk to someone who shares your interest, who intersects with your interest and have an actual conversation. You're not promoting anything. You don't need tons of followers in order to get engagement. Like you can just go in there and have a conversation. And so yeah, I see you have something
No,
to say. So
I'm new to this app, and I just downloaded it, so I don't really know how it works. But in the audio space, there was also an app that came out a few years ago, and they also wanted to get away from this idea of followership. But then the users, I would say, in this app, which was all about audio, they still forced the network really into this mode because people wanted to open chat rooms and talk about themselves, and they had topics and they wanted to pitch their products, and it was hard for that channel, and arguably that is the death of that channel because it kind of got captured by the users. As you are thinking about growing, I saw a message 5 months ago. You said this was like Christmas time. You said, we have new software. We're launching on the web, and you had this phrase: "We are moving deliberately towards the thoughtful and friendly culture that we want to maintain." So, thoughtful and friendly people.
mhm.
Um, can you scale a network simply based on thoughtful and friendly people? Because aren't all these networks geared up towards mega giga scaling? Isn't your ultimate goal to have hundreds of millions on this platform?
Yeah. Yeah, that is the question, isn't it? So, it's true that we've thrown out popularity mechanisms, which arguably explain the success of these massive networks. Like they thrive because of popularity mechanisms. There's
Mhm.
both good and bad consequences of that. They tend to be addictive. They give you dopamine hits. Like we know why we have trouble getting off these networks because like they obviously make us feel addicted. But that's why they're successful, and then they expand and grow and become massive and worldwide. And we just got rid of all of that. But I still believe that it can be equally successful, but for other reasons. It's interesting to think that there's only one way that people can socialize in the world, which is through a popularity contest. Like that's not true. Like, where is there a popularity contest really, since like in actuality in the real world? Like that's like the junior high school cafeteria. Like that's like a place that you wouldn't want to perpetuate all of society to become the junior high school cafeteria. Like there were things that we all used to do before 20 years ago that weren't popularity driven, that were arguably actually pleasurable social interactions. So I don't think that it's necessarily an obvious point that like this is the only way things could work, but still a legitimate question whether the way we're doing it could work. It's a very important business question because otherwise like we can't survive if this isn't appealing. But I think it's appealing for exactly the opposite reasons that these other ones are appealing, is because this is a place where you actually can get engagement if you're not a celebrity. Like, this is a place where you can be heard. This is a place where you can be your authentic self because you don't have to build up a following. So you just do things because you're interested in them. This is a place where, because of that, the people you're interacting with are also being their authentic selves. It's also a place where you meet people who you would never meet anywhere else, because there's, on the other places, the people you meet are the people who are playing the popularity game for the most part.
Can I ask you a naive question, Ken? How do I keep track of the people I meet, though? Because surely I can still keep track of people, even though you can't follow people. In other words,
Yeah.
because if you can't, all right, so I'm keeping track of my topic, which, whether it's entrepreneurship or AI or whatnot, I think I clicked on a few. I am, but as interested as I am in those topics, isn't the default that I'm also going to want to keep track of you, or are you not allowing me to keep track of Ken? It's
No,
like, if whenever you happen to post on AI, I can read about you. Is that the logic?
No, you're right. Yeah, we do let you track another person. Like, you might not want to forget someone you met. So we basically call it a bookmark. We give you a bookmark. You can bookmark the person, and then you can just remember like who you bookmarked, and you can go back and send them a message or something like that. But the important functional point is, it has zero effect on anyone's or your own feed. So bookmarking someone
Mhm.
doesn't cause like you to see more of their stuff in your feed. It has no effect on your feed. So we're being sincere to or we're being genuine to our ideology. Like, there's not any real following. But yeah, of course, as a practical matter, we let you remember people who you don't want to forget. So yeah, we have that.
Fast forward 5 years, how is Maven going to then exist? Is it like, what kinds
Mhm.
of investors will be buying into this model in mass scale? But what sort of objective do they have? The ones that are supporting you or supporting this particular
Yeah.
thing?
Yeah. So in 5 years, let if we can be hopeful, we would hope that there's a billion people in the system. And the thing to understand is that at scale, open-ended systems are more powerful. So this kind of system, even though it's not a popularity contest, also really thrives on scale, because the point is, open-ended systems become more interesting the more stepping stones they have. Like, that's why today in 2024, there are more possible things that can be invented than 100 years ago, because more things have been invented. The more stuff you have, the more stuff you can have. This is going to be true in Maven at large scale, in the sense that, like, for you, it's going to be, if there were a billion people on the system, any little thing that you think of that you're interested in, if you send that into the system, you'll find people all over the place, all over the world, that could have that transformative connection for you. It'll figure those people out. So, like, if there's some farmer in Thailand that could explain something to you, and they're just the one for you, that you'll get connected to them because there's like a billion people on the system. And this would be at scale a completely unique experience. You can't
But
get that
Ken, is
kind of
it
magic.
collaborative in that sense? And I guess I have a lot of questions, because I'm wondering, what is the incentive structure here? Because let's
Mhm.
say that I am more clever than I'm actually, at the moment. But let's just say I am a super clever person, but I also want to go into your system, and I want to present my ideas, and I may not want greatness out of it, but I do at least want to further civilization, or I want to feel like I'm
Mhm.
being heard. What are the incentives I have to present something that I elsewhere could have presented as a paper or as a concept or as a
Mhm.
quip in a radio show? What and then secondly, you talk about true creativity and greatness. So you're talking mostly about collaborative projects, because there are very few
Mhm.
Einsteins among us, right? So we are
Mhm.
in teams. We can be extremely
Yeah.
effective. Like, the space station was not created by one person. NASA has
Yeah.
enormous teamwork to put people on the moon, all that stuff.
Yeah.
So how do you handle collaboration in this mode?
Yeah. So, although we talk about following interests as the key mechanism that you use, like, to organize your feed and what you see ultimately, the real motivation behind this is to connect with people. Like, what I
Mhm.
really believe is that the stepping stones that could be transformative to you exist out in the world, most likely inside someone else, inside another human. Like,
Mm.
if there was someone that you could discuss an idea that you have, and it was the right person, then they could cause a chain reaction where, like, you could build on that idea with that person. You just don't know who that right person is, who has that unlocking key that would change the direction of your life. But if you had access to a billion people, if we could find that person, that would be an extremely powerful tool. But it's all about the fact that you connected with that person. That's what leads to the transformative experience. And I just want to be clear, I'm not just talking about things like inventing things for practical matters in civilization, which obviously is important, but also it could just be personal discovery. It could be like an emotional insight. Like it's like there's lots of transformative experience. They don't all have to be that we like wrote a new research paper or something like that. But
So,
those
Ken,
are
I'm curious,
residing.
are you able to track that so far? I mean, you just launched basically, but have you been able to track the way that people, want proof points? So if I ask you, or will you start tracking, let's say I go on this network and I have this massive discovery or self-discovery, or I feel really enriched by this. Will you be tracking, or are there stories on the network already of people who are expressing what this has meant to them? Like, oh, I got this great idea, or I met Sam and we are happy forever after because we talk about all these things as if we were in front of the fireplace. I'm just trying to understand what could one reasonably expect from this network.
Yeah, yeah. And so the thing that should lead to that, that we would hope would lead to that, is the fact that you're intersecting along interests. And so if you're discussing something like AI ethics, and if you were in an AI forum talking to AI people, a lot of the time you get the same kind of stuff that you're used to hearing if you're in the AI community, because a lot of the opinions and angles have been exhausted and we've heard them all over and over again. But on Maven, you're not just going to be connected to people who are in the AI community. You're going to find
Mhm,
other people who have other perspectives. And we've certainly seen that, like that people have their eyes opened to perspectives that you can't get in other places. Like there
mhm,
was like one of the most popular threads of all right now is this thing, do you deserve your wealth? Which I thought was a really interesting discussion. It's like hundreds of responses on this topic.
mhm,
And I was just thinking, like, where would you go to have this discussion that isn't Maven? Now, just think about for a second, like the options here. Like one option is that you could go to like something like X, and you could post there, and maybe you could start a discussion on the topic. It's an interesting topic. Do you deserve your wealth?
mhm,
But if you don't have a lot of followers, there's not a lot of hope there. So that's like one reason that people will go, is because you don't need followers, and 99.9% of us don't have them. So immediately you get that chance. But then beyond that, like if you go to Reddit or something like that, like then you get into a silo. So where would you go to ask this question? Do you deserve your wealth? You can go to a wealth forum, like personal finance. But then
mhm,
you're just getting people who like talking about wealth. That's what they've explicitly decided they're going to spend their time sitting inside of a personal finance forum. And somehow we must recognize that like the question is way deeper than that. It's not about planning for retirement. It's almost a philosophical question. Like
mhm,
what do we actually deserve in the world? You almost can like take wealth out of it. What makes you deserve things? And so I would like to have other people in the discussion. How would I bring those people into the discussion? And where can I go? Immediately, Maven offers a solution to this. You don't have to even think about it. Maven
mhm,
finds all those cross-cutting communities and then brings them all together into a single discussion, which is why I think the discussion was so electric, because it wasn't
mhm.
just the usual like wealth managers and people interested in retirement. It's like a deep discussion among a really large cross-section of society. And so I think that's an anecdotal example, but that's the kind of thing we would be looking for at scale, is lots of those deep cross-cutting discussions where people get to meet and talk to other people where they wouldn't otherwise have any chance to do that, even if they did have a lot of followers. Because then you always get the same people, that you have to get the same follower pool and you have to play to them. So this is where serendipity comes from. It's unexpected intersections and events.
Ken, I have only one more question because we've been talking for a while. What will the future of serendipity hold if if Maven becomes part of it, or even more generally, what are your thoughts on serendipity as a power principle for civilization? Where is that heading, and where
Mhm.
is something going to
Mhm.
change, or would it depend on Maven? I mean, generally, serendipity has always existed, right? So to a certain extent, there is a residual there that we have in civilization,
Mhm. Yeah,
presumably,
yeah,
unless you
yeah.
think are we losing it or are we gaining it? I guess is my question.
Mhm. Well, the message I would want to convey is that serendipity is not random. A lot of people equate serendipity with randomness, which is why people think of it as something you can't control or do anything about. It just happens when it happens, and you got lucky. But my entire career is about creating the conditions that increase the chances of serendipity. That's what open-ended systems are. They're systems designed to be serendipitous because they don't have an explicit goal. And so I've learned through my research that serendipity is something that you can actually increase the likelihood of experiencing. It's algorithmic, and it's about increasing the exposure to stepping stones and collecting stepping stones. That's what civilization does. It collects stepping stones. And so I think that we have actually been getting worse at that as a side effect of the fact that we live in this very objective, assessment-driven culture, which has grown up and become more sophisticated over history, over recent history especially, with the increasing sophistication of our technology and tools and management theories. And the thing we missed is this issue that it actually gets in the way of serendipity to be trying to control everything. I mean, think it's not like a hard thing to understand that. Like, obviously, the more you control things, the less serendipity you have. You need to be open to opportunities to have serendipity. And so we're a very controlling society, like the way our culture works. And this is worldwide. It's not just one country. It's totally worldwide. And so I think that with recognition of this fact, the hopeful future is one where serendipity does increase because we start to understand how do systems actually work that do increase serendipity. It's not to say that all systems should. Some systems should be objective because serendipity and exploration entail risk. And there's some cases in life where you can't afford to take a risk. But in the places where risk is appropriate, which is like research is one example, of course we want the systems to be serendipitous. And because we're learning and understanding how that should be from an algorithmic perspective, I have hope that we can actually do it both in terms of algorithms and institutionally. Like, we can increase serendipity in a lot of our institutions. And so the future should be, in principle, it should be more serendipitous on Maven, but also off Maven, in an optimistic view of like what perhaps like the ideas in my book could accomplish.
Well, I like to end on optimistic because something that I've learned in working a lot with risk recently is that, you have to combine perspectives, and risk and innovation are, very connected, but I think risk, innovation, and optimism are also actually very connected. It's hard, I think, to achieve great goals if you don't go in there with the idea that it is possible to achieve those things. So anyway, this has been fascinating. I certainly will explore more, more what this would mean here, and I wish you best of luck. I hope I can check in with you. I think that the topics that you are exploring here with serendipity, they have certain ramifications I would wanted to go deeper in when it comes to kind of the future of skills and other things that I'm deeply interested in. What should we optimize for then? If we can certainly optimize for something where we know the outcomes, but for the greater things, and educational institutions, societies, governments, even large companies, technology areas, they are also open-ended, but then how do you organize the efforts there? These are questions I want to ask you. We're not going to do them today, but thank you for opening up this space, and best of luck with what you're involved in right now.
And thank you so much. It's great to be here. I'd love to come back and talk about those questions. They're super interesting. I hope people stop by heymaven.com and check it out.
All right. Okay. Take care. Thank you so much.
You have just listened to another episode of the Futurized podcast with me, Trond Arne Undheim, futurist, scholar, and author. If you are interested in my products and services, feel free to check out futurized.org/store, where you can book a keynote speech, become a sponsor or partner, request a podcast swap, or buy a few of my books, such as Augmented Lean, Health Tech, Future Tech, Pandemic Aftermath, Disruption Games, or Leadership from Below. If you're interested in any or all of my projects, check out my website, trondundheim.com, which has links to other podcasts as well as my public appearances. Thank you. Please share this show with those you care about. To find us on social media is easy. We are Futurized on LinkedIn and YouTube, and Futurized 2 on Instagram and Twitter. See you next time. Futurized, conversations that matter.